The night had fallen thick over the desert, quiet as a prayer and heavy as a secret. The moon rode low, casting a silver line along the cracked stones of an abandoned mission house. Somewhere between the silence and the faint whisper of wind, a horse's slow steps echoed. Its rider, tall and broad-shouldered, moved like a shadow cut from the earth itself. He was an Apache warrior, one of the last of his kind who still carried pride in his blood and the scars of many battles across his skin. People said he had traded his heart for vengeance long ago. Yet that night he carried gold instead of a weapon. He dismounted at the wooden steps, tying his horse to a crooked post. The building looked tired, its walls breathing old stories of sin and forgiveness. Inside, a faint candlelight trembled through the cracks, and soft music played from a distant corner. The place was not for war or prayer. It was for men who sought what they had lost in life: warmth, touch, and the illusion of peace. For the first time in many months, the Apache had come seeking none of those, but something he could not name. When he stepped inside, the smell of burning sage and old whiskey filled the air. A woman at the counter looked up, her eyes trained to judge what kind of man entered: soldier, outlaw, or wanderer. But this man did not fit any of them. His silence had weight. His eyes, dark and still as a mountain lake, carried the kind of pain people learned not to ask about. Without a word, he laid a few coins on the table, enough for one night. The woman nodded, her gaze softening as she pointed him toward a narrow hallway at the back. They said she was new, the one waiting behind that door. No one knew her story, only that she spoke little and smiled even less. Some said she had been a rancher's wife before the war took everything. Others claimed she was a preacher's daughter who'd vanished one winter night and returned with shadows under her eyes. Whatever truth lived behind her silence, it had not yet been told. And perhaps that was what drew him there: the mystery, the quiet, the chance to forget who he was. He pushed open the door and stepped into a small room lit by candles. The walls glowed soft, the scent of lavender faint in the air. She stood by the window, her back to him, her hair loose and dark as the night itself. When she turned, he saw the truth the rumors had only whispered. She was beautiful, but not in a way that came from youth or powder. Her beauty was made of something worn, something broken but unyielding, like a glass that had cracked yet never shattered. She greeted him with a nod, her voice low. "You came for a night," she said quietly, "but not for what most men come for." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His presence spoke enough, the kind of presence that came from long years of silence, of watching friends die and dreams turn to dust. He placed his knife and belt aside, not as a gesture of trust, but respect. She watched him, her hands trembling slightly as she poured a small drink and handed it over. He refused it. His eyes searched hers, not with desire, but with a question he didn't yet know how to ask. Minutes passed in stillness. The wind outside brushed against the shutters, whispering like a voice that remembered sorrow. Finally, she broke the silence again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you believe," she asked, "that a person can pay for peace?" He looked at her, the question sinking into him. After a pause, he replied, "Peace is not for sale." The words hung between them, heavy and true. For the first time she smiled, though her eyes remained distant. "Then why are you here?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Perhaps he didn't know. Perhaps he had come not for her, but for the weight of his own loneliness. For years he had lived with ghosts, the faces of people he couldn't save, the sound of a woman's cry echoing in the flames of a burning village. Maybe he wanted to silence them for just one night. She stepped closer, and for a moment the light flickered across the scars on his chest, reminders of battles fought in dust and rage. She reached out, hesitated, then lowered her hand. "You've seen too much," she said softly, "and I've lost too much." Her words trembled, carrying something heavier than fear, guilt. He noticed how her fingers clenched at her dress, how her breath caught every time silence returned. There was something she was hiding, something that made her fragile in a way that strength alone couldn't protect. When she turned away to blow out one of the candles, her shoulders shook slightly, though she tried to hide it. He saw it, the small, unguarded tremor that betrayed her calm. The room darkened a little more, and the shadows deepened around them. He could feel her fear, though it wasn't of him. It was of something deeper, something that lived inside her like an old wound. He spoke, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to do this." She froze, her back still to him. "It's what I'm paid for," she said, almost too quickly. But the lie cracked before it left her lips. He could hear it in the tremor of her breath. Slowly, she turned to face him again, eyes glistening under the flickering candlelight. "I need to," she whispered. "Not for the money, but because it's the only way I can forget." Her words drew him in, not with desire, but with empathy. He knew that kind of pain, the kind that made people trade pieces of their soul for a single night of silence. And yet something about her felt different. The way she stood, the way her voice broke, it wasn't just sorrow, it was shame, heavy and raw. She moved to untie the ribbon at her shoulder, but her hands trembled so hard she couldn't finish. Tears welled in her eyes, falling before she could stop them. He stepped forward instinctively, his rough hands hovering just inches from her arms.
"Why are you crying?"
he asked quietly. She shook her head, unable to speak at first. Then, through shaking lips, she whispered, "Because I thought I could forget. But you remind me of someone I lost." Her voice cracked with the confession, and the sound pierced the still air. The Apache froze, his breath shallow. There was something in her tone, something that reached into the part of him he thought long buried. Memories stirred of smoke, of screams, of a burning farmhouse where a woman had once stood in the doorway, crying as soldiers dragged her away. Could it be that she— No, it couldn't. Yet her eyes, her face, the scar along her wrist, it all struck him like lightning. He stepped back, uncertain. She turned away again, covering her face. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. The candles flickered wildly as if disturbed by a hidden wind. Neither spoke for a long while. Then she said softly, "You're not like the others. You didn't come for pleasure, did you?" His silence was the answer. She nodded slowly, tears tracing down her cheeks. "Maybe that's what frightens me most." Outside, thunder rolled across the plains. The storm was moving closer, and the air smelled of rain and dust. Inside, both stood caught in the stillness between what was said and what was not. He wanted to leave, yet something in her eyes held him there, something unfinished, something that whispered of a shared past neither could escape. As lightning flared through the window, he noticed a small charm hanging around her neck, a beaded token of Apache craft. Old and faded, the kind only made for family or love. His heart pounded. He reached out slowly, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Where did you get that?" She looked at him, startled, clutching it close. "It was given to me long ago." Before everything burned, his world tilted. The air vanished from his lungs. That single sentence struck him harder than any bullet. The memory roared back. The smoke, the cries, the woman who disappeared into the fire. She had been lost, or so he thought. And now she stood before him, trembling, broken, alive. But before he could speak, before the truth could rise between them, the last candle went out. Darkness swallowed the room whole, and in that darkness both hearts trembled, one in disbelief, the other in fear of what dawn would bring. The darkness lingered long after the last candle had gone out. For a while neither of them moved nor spoke. The only sound was the wind pressing against the old mission walls, like a ghost trying to come inside. When the Apache finally found his breath again, he stepped closer, trying to see her face in the thin streak of moonlight that slipped through the window. She stood still, her shoulders trembling as if the truth itself had weight. He wanted to ask again where she had gotten the beaded charm. But something in her silence stopped him. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the way her eyes avoided his, as though she already knew the storm he carried inside. The room felt smaller now, not because of space, but because of the memories clawing their way back from the past. Years ago, before he became the man people feared and whispered about, he had been just another son of the desert. His people had lived by the rhythm of the sun and the will of the earth. He had loved once a gentle love that had promised peace even in a land that had forgotten the word. But that peace was stolen in fire. He remembered that night clearly. Soldiers came without warning, torches lighting up the valley. Screams cut through the smoke, and in the chaos he lost her. He searched for days through ashes and silence, until the wind buried even her name. From that day on, he became a ghost of his own making, chasing revenge instead of hope. Now, seeing the charm in this woman's hand brought back everything he had buried. It was impossible, yet undeniable. The beadwork was unique, woven by his mother's hands, given only to those bound by blood or love. But how could it have found its way to her? She finally spoke, her voice trembling but steady enough to pierce the silence. That night, everything burned, she said. The house, the land, even the sky looked like it wanted to fall. I thought I'd died there. Her eyes flickered toward him, and for a moment their gazes met, two broken souls, recognizing the same pain in each other. Someone pulled me from the fire, she whispered. But I lost everything after that. He felt his heart clench. Who saved you? He asked, his tone low but urgent. I don't know, she replied softly. I woke up miles away in the hands of men who took me where I didn't want to go. They said the past was gone and I should forget it. But you can't forget what your soul remembers. The words hit him harder than any wound. He stepped back, his fists tightening as the truth began to form in pieces that hurt to fit together. If she had truly come from that fire, then fate had brought them back to the same place where their worlds had ended, one seeking peace, the other trying to remember it. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When I first came here, she said quietly, I thought I could build a new life. But every night I see the faces of those I lost. Sometimes I think I hear their voices in the wind. He looked at her, the flickering light from the window tracing the sadness across her face. The wind carries what we cannot bury, he said, almost to himself. And some things were never meant to rest. Outside, the rain began to fall, slow and steady. Each drop against the roof sounded like a heartbeat, one that neither of them could silence. The storm had arrived, but it wasn't just outside. It lived in the space between them. She turned to him suddenly, her expression caught between hope and fear. You came here tonight for something more than a paid visit, didn't you? He nodded slightly, his eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't know what I was looking for, he said. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe a way to stop hearing the cries of that night. Her breath caught at his words. The cries, she repeated softly. You were there? His eyes lifted to hers. The truth hovered between them like a blade. He could have lied. It would have been easier. But something in her gaze demanded honesty. Yes, he said at last. I was there. I fought that night, and I lost everything too. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Her lips parted as though to speak, but no sound came. The world outside seemed to fade. The rain, the wind, even the earth itself. All that existed was that room, the truth and the pain it carried. She stood slowly, her eyes searching his face for something, maybe blame, maybe understanding. Then you saw what they did, she whispered. He nodded once. And I did what I could to stop it. A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Did you save anyone? He hesitated, his voice low. I tried, but the fire took more than I could fight. She turned away again, walking toward the window. Lightning flashed, lighting up her profile in white light. Then maybe we are both ghosts, she said. Two people who survived what should have ended us. He watched her quietly. In her words, he saw something he hadn't felt in years, the reflection of his own brokenness. She was not just another stranger in the night. She was a reminder of everything he'd lost, and everything he had tried to forget. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost a whisper. I've dreamed of that fire every night since. Sometimes I see a man pulling me from the flames. I never saw his face, only his eyes. She turned toward him slowly. They looked like yours. His heart skipped. He wanted to speak, to tell her the truth that was now burning in his chest, but words failed him. Instead, he took a step forward, his voice barely above the sound of rain. Maybe the past isn't finished with us, he said. Her lips trembled. Maybe it never will be. They stood like that for a long time, two souls bound by something deeper than fate. The storm outside grew wilder, shaking the old building, rattling the shutters like the earth itself wanted them to remember. He finally broke the silence. If you were saved that night, he said, then maybe you were meant to live for a reason. Maybe there's something left for you to find. And you? She asked quietly. He looked away, his jaw tightening. Maybe I meant to understand why I couldn't save everyone else. Her eyes softened. You don't have to carry that alone. He shook his head slowly. It's all I know how to carry. The candles flickered again as a gust of wind slipped through the cracks. The air between them pulsed with something neither could name, not love. Not forgiveness, but the beginning of something both feared to feel. She took a small step closer, her hand brushing against his arm. The touch was light, uncertain. You remind me of what it feels like to be alive, she whispered. He met her eyes. And you remind me of what it costs. For a moment, they stood caught in that fragile truth. The rain softened, the thunder moved away, and the quiet returned, not peaceful, but heavy with meaning. In the distance, the sound of horses echoed faintly through the valley. Riders, maybe soldiers, maybe strangers. It was a sound that promised more trouble to come. She heard it too, and tensed, turning toward the door. They've been searching, she said quickly. The men I escaped from, they won't stop until they find me. He looked at her sharply. Why would they want you? She hesitated, her hand shaking. Because I took something from them. Something they would kill to get back. The words struck like lightning. He stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. What did you take? She met his gaze, her eyes filled with fear. Proof, she said. Proof of what they did to your people and to mine. Before he could respond, the sound of hooves grew louder, closer. The past they had both been running from had finally caught up to them. And as the storm began to rise again, both of them realized that the night was far from over, and neither would leave it unchanged. The rain poured harder, striking the roof like stones. The old mission walls groaned as if the building itself feared what was coming. The Apache stood by the window, staring into the darkness, where the sound of hooves echoed closer. The woman gripped the edge of the bed, her breath uneven, her eyes wide with dread. He could see the fear in her, but beneath it was something else. Determination, maybe even guilt. Whatever she had stolen, it was worth more than her life. And now the past was racing toward them with thunder and steel. He turned from the window. How many are coming? He asked. 3, maybe 4, she said, her voice shaking. They wear the mark of the ranch, the one that owns half this desert. They're not soldiers, but they kill like them. He knew the kind. Men who wore money as armor and carried cruelty in their eyes. They had taken land, lives, and dignity from anyone weaker than them. If they find you, he said quietly, they won't stop with questions. She nodded, her hands trembling. They think I ran with the evidence. They don't know I hid it. His eyes narrowed. Where? Somewhere safe, she said quickly. If they knew, they'd burn this whole place to the ground. He studied her face. There was something in her tone that made him believe her. Yet, he could sense that she was still keeping something back, something she wasn't ready to trust him with. Outside, the horses drew closer. The sound of men shouting faintly against the rain. He stepped toward her. If they come in here, they'll kill you. Maybe both of us. Her voice quivered, but she met his eyes. Then why are you still here? He paused for a long moment before answering. Because I've already lost too much to run from another fire. The air between them tightened with unspoken emotion. She opened her mouth to speak, but before the words came, the door burst open. The light from the hallway spilled in, and a man's shadow filled the frame. His face was half hidden by a hat dripping with rain, but his voice was sharp. We're looking for someone, a woman. Pretty dark hair, runs her mouth too much. The Apache said nothing. He stood still, watching, measuring. The man's eyes slid toward the woman, and his smile turned thin. There you are. Thought you could hide here? She took a step back, her breath quickening. "I didn't steal anything," she said, though her voice betrayed her lie. The man laughed. "You should have known better than to cross him. You think anyone escapes the ranch alive?" He moved forward, hand on his revolver. The Apache's voice came low, like distant thunder. "Leave." The man froze, glancing at him with a smirk. "You got a death wish, Chief?" In one swift motion, the Apache stepped between them. His stance was calm, but his eyes burned with the promise of violence. I said, "Leave." For a moment, no one moved. Then the man reached for his gun. Before he could pull the trigger, the Apache struck one motion, clean and silent. The weapon clattered to the floor, and the man stumbled back, clutching his wrist. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "They'll come for you both." The Apache didn't answer. He kicked the gun away and shoved him toward the door. The man staggered out into the rain, cursing, before disappearing into the night. When the door closed again, the room was heavy with silence. The woman stared at him, stunned. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "Now they'll never stop." He turned toward her. They weren't going to stop anyway. Her eyes glistened. "You don't understand who he works for. The rancher. He owns the sheriff, the judges, even the men in town. No one crosses him and lives. And it's time someone did," he said. She shook her head. "You can't fight him alone." "I fought worse," he said simply. She walked toward him, gripping his arm. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know who I am." He looked down at her hand, then into her eyes. "Maybe I do." For a moment they stood close, the sound of rain wrapping around them like a shield. Then she stepped back, wiping her tears. "If we stay here, they'll find us. We have to go before dawn." He nodded. "Where?" "There's a cave north of the valley. My father used to take me there. It's where I hid what they're after." He grabbed his knife and his belt, fastening them silently. "Then we move now." They slipped out into the storm, the rain soaking through their clothes as they crossed the barren land. The moon hid behind clouds, and the only light came from flashes of lightning across the horizon. Each step was heavy with tension, not just from the danger chasing them, but from the truth that neither of them was ready to face. After an hour of walking, they reached the edge of a dry creek bed. The woman stumbled, clutching her side. He stopped, helping her steady herself. "We can rest here," he said. She shook her head. "No, we're close. I can make it." He looked at her, seeing the exhaustion in her face. "You're not built for this kind of running." Right. She managed a faint smile. "Neither was I built for what they did to me, but I'm still here." He couldn't argue with that. They moved again, the wind howling through the canyons like the cries of lost souls. When they finally reached the cave, dawn was beginning to break. The first hint of gold touched the sky, and the rain slowed to a whisper. Inside, the cave was dark and cold. She knelt near a pile of stones and began to dig carefully. After a few minutes, she pulled out a small metal box, rusted and worn. She opened it, revealing papers, maps, and a folded photograph. He knelt beside her. "What is it?" "Records," she said. "Proof that the rancher worked with soldiers to burn the Apache lands. He took the land, sold the rest, and blamed your people for it." His hands clenched. "So it was never a war between tribes. It was theft and murder. They destroyed everything to hide it." He looked at the photograph, a younger version of the rancher standing beside military men, smiling over a burned valley. The sight made his chest tighten. "How did you get this?" "I was his wife," she said quietly. The words hit him like a blow. He turned to her, disbelief and anger twisting inside him. "His wife?" She nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. "I didn't know what he was until it was too late. When I found out what he'd done, I took what I could and ran. I thought if I could prove it, someone would stop him." He stood, pacing, trying to process it. "You lived with the man who burned my people." "I didn't know," she said desperately. "He lied to everyone, and when I found the truth, he tried to kill me too." The silence that followed was thick with pain. He wanted to be angry, but all he saw was the same broken soul he had met in that candlelit room. A woman caught in a war she never chose. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. If this is real, then the truth can burn him worse than any fire. She looked up at him, her expression weary, but filled with hope. That's why I need your help. I can't do it alone. He hesitated. The idea of working with her, with the widow of the man who had destroyed his world, cut deep. But something in her eyes reminded him that redemption sometimes came from the unlikeliest places. Before he could answer, a sound echoed from outside the cave, hooves again, closer this time, and voices calling. They had been followed. She grabbed the box and clutched it to her chest. They found us. He drew his knife and motioned for her to stay low. The sunlight broke through the clouds just enough to reveal shadows moving at the mouth of the cave. 3 men dismounted, guns in hand. One of them called out, "You can't run forever, sweetheart. The boss just wants what's his." The Apache's voice came from the darkness, calm and sharp. "Tell him he'll have to take it from me." The men froze, scanning the rocks. The tension was thick enough to taste. The woman held her breath as thunder rolled one last time through the valley. The first shot came suddenly, ricocheting off stone. The Apache moved fast, disappearing into the shadows. The fight had found them. Neither the desert nor the storm would stay silent much longer. The air inside the cave turned cold and sharp with fear. The Apache pressed his back against the stone wall, watching the faint light from outside shift as the men moved closer. The woman crouched near the back, clutching the metal box to her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her alive. The echoes of boots on wet ground crept closer with every second, and the sound of clicking revolvers filled the air like an omen. He took a slow breath, his muscles tense, his senses sharp. He had been hunted before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a reckoning. The past had finally caught up to both of them, and there was no more running left to do. He motioned for her to stay down, his hand firm but calm. She nodded, her face pale in the dim light. Outside, one of the men called out, "You can't hide in there forever. The boss said to bring you back, dead or alive." The Apache didn't answer. Instead, he moved quietly toward the mouth of the cave, each step silent as the storm beyond. The rain had stopped, but thunder still rolled in the distance, deep and slow. He could see their shadows now, 3 men, rifles drawn. Scanning the rocks, the first man stepped forward, peering into the darkness. "Come on out, Chief," he sneered. "No need to die for some woman who ain't worth the trouble." The Apache didn't move. He waited until the man's boot hit the dry ground inside, and then he struck. It happened fast. The sound of struggle, the flash of a blade, a muffled cry. The man fell before he even had time to fire. The others shouted, scrambling for cover. Gunfire erupted, bullets sparking against the rocks. The woman screamed and ducked lower, covering her ears. Smoke and dust filled the cave. The smell of gunpowder thick in the air. The Apache crawled along the wall, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't hold them off forever. "Give it up," one of the men yelled. "You're outnumbered." But the Apache knew these lands better than anyone. Every ridge, every echo was a weapon if you knew how to use it. He threw a small rock toward the far side of the cave, drawing their fire. When the muzzle flash lit up the entrance, he moved from the shadows and struck again. When the noise died down, 2 men lay motionless outside, and the third was gone, vanished into the trees. The Apache waited, listening to the silence. He knew it wasn't over. A man like that didn't run. He regrouped. He turned to the woman. "We have to move." She nodded shakily, still clutching the box. "There's a trail behind the cave. It leads down to the river, he said, helping her stand. "Don't stop, no matter what." They ran through the narrow passage, the morning light bleeding through the rocks. The air was cool and smelled of wet earth. Below, the river twisted through the canyon, swollen from the storm. As they climbed down, the woman slipped on the mud, and he caught her arm just in time. For a moment, their eyes met, fear and trust colliding in the space between them. "Thank you," she whispered. "Save your breath," he replied. "We're not safe yet." They followed the riverbank, moving fast, but the sound of a distant horse broke the calm. The Apache looked up toward the ridge and saw the glint of sunlight off metal. The last gunman wasn't alone anymore. 2 more riders appeared beside him, moving in their direction. The woman's face went pale. He found help. He clenched his jaw. Then we'll find higher ground. It turned into the canyon, where cliffs rose like walls on both sides. The path narrowed until only one could walk at a time. Every sound, every scrape of stone, every step felt too loud. Behind them, the horses grew louder. The woman gasped. "What if they catch us?" "They won't," he said. "Not if I can help it." As they rounded a bend, he spotted a small ledge above the path, the perfect place to make a stand. He turned to her. "Climb up there. Stay down and don't move." "I'm not leaving you," she said. "You're not leaving," he said quietly. "You're surviving. There's a difference." He hesitated, but his eyes left no room for argument. She climbed to the ledge, clutching the box close, her heart hammering as the echoes of hoofbeats drew closer. The Apache crouched behind a boulder, his knife in one hand and a fallen gun in the other. The canyon fell silent for a breath. Then the first rider appeared, scanning the trail, spread out. The leader barked, "He's close." The Apache waited until they were in range, then fired once. The shot echoed off the stone walls, sending the riders scattering. He moved fast, switching positions before they could track him. Bullets cracked against the rocks. Sparks flew. Dust filled the air again. The woman covered her mouth to keep from crying out. She wanted to help, but fear held her still. Then she noticed movement below. One of the riders had slipped behind, sneaking toward the Apache's flank. Her eyes widened. "Behind you," she shouted. The Apache turned just in time. The gunman fired, grazing his shoulder. Pain burned through him, but he didn't stop. He lunged forward, tackling the man to the ground. They fought in the mud, fists and blades colliding. The woman watched, trembling, unable to look away. The struggle ended with a sharp sound, then silence. The Apache staggered to his feet, blood on his arm, his breath rough. 2 men down. 1 left, but the last rider didn't attack. Instead, he stepped into view, slow and deliberate, a cruel smile on his face. "You've got fight, I'll give you that," he said. "The boss will be disappointed when he hears how many of his men you've buried." The Apache aimed the gun, but the man held up his hand. "Before you shoot, maybe you should hear what he's planning. He doesn't just want the woman dead. He wants that box because it'll bring the army down with him." "Duh!" The woman's heart skipped. "You know what's in it?" The man nodded. "Enough to burn this whole territory. But tell me, lady, do you really think anyone will believe you? You're the wife of the man who caused it all." Her face went white. "I'm not his wife anymore." The man smirked. "No, but you'll always be his property in the eyes of this land." And him he nodded, toward the Apache. "He's the one they'll hang for it." The Apache fired, but the man ducked and ran for the horses. The bullet ricocheted off stone. Within seconds, the echo of hooves faded into the distance. The woman climbed down quickly, rushing to the Apache's side. "You're bleeding." He wiped his arm with a torn cloth. "It's nothing. It's something," she said firmly. "You can't fight him like this." He looked at her, exhaustion in his eyes. "I've been fighting him my whole life." She knelt beside him, wrapping the cloth tighter around his wound. "Then let me help you finish it." Stared at her, unsure what to say. She had once belonged to his enemy, yet here she was, saving him with shaking hands. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a fragile bond built from shared pain, but the quiet didn't last. In the distance, a horn sounded long and low. "More riders. They're bringing more," he said. She looked toward the horizon, fear rising again. "We can't outrun that many," Ali said. "But we can make them follow us somewhere they can't win." "Where?" He looked toward the mountains. "Home." The word hung in the air like a promise. She didn't understand at first, but when she saw the look in his eyes, she knew. The old Apache lands, the burned village, the place where it all began. That was where he would end it. They started moving again, climbing the narrow trail that led out of the canyon. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a harsh light across the valley. Every step was harder than the last. The Apache's wound throbbed, but he pressed on. The woman stayed close, her eyes scanning the horizon for the men who hunted them as they reached the ridge.
Oh.
The wind grew stronger, carrying the scent of smoke. The ruins of the Apache village stretched below, charred remains of what had once been home. The sight made his chest tighten. She placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to face this alone." He looked down at her, his face hard but his voice soft. "I've always been alone. But maybe that ends today." From the valley below, they could already hear the distant echo of hooves. The riders were coming. Dust rose like a storm in the distance. The woman held the box close. "If we don't stop them here, everything we've done will mean nothing." He nodded, his jaw set. "Then we stop them." The wind howled across the empty land, carrying the weight of 100 lost voices. As the shadows of the riders appeared at the edge of the horizon, the Apache tightened his grip on his knife. The woman stood beside him, her fear replaced with resolve. The moment before the storm hit was silent. The kind of silence that comes before the world, changes forever. And when the first rider appeared through the dust, gun raised, the Apache took a deep breath and stepped forward into the light. Ready to face everything that had ever haunted him, the wind carried dust and smoke across the valley as the riders approached the ruins. The Apache stood at the edge of the burned village, his silhouette tall against the rising sun. Every piece of this land had a memory, laughter, pain, fire, and now it would hold one more. The woman stood behind him, clutching the box of truth close to her chest. Her dress was torn, her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes burned with a strange calm. The sound of the approaching horses grew louder, echoing between the blackened remains of the past. The Apache bent down and picked up a handful of ash, letting it fall between his fingers. "They took everything from here," he said quietly, "but they never took the truth." She stepped closer, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "And that's what scares them the most." The first rider came into view, followed by a dozen more. Their coats flapped in the wind, their rifles gleaming under the morning light. At the front rode the rancher, a man whose name was known across counties, whose power came from both gold and fear. His eyes, cold and proud, met the Apache's from across the distance. "So, not," the rancher called out, his voice cutting through the air. "You're the ghost I've been hearing about." He smiled thinly. "You should have stayed dead with the rest of your kind." The Apache didn't move. "And you should have stopped burning what wasn't yours." The rancher laughed. "I built everything you see here. This land, this valley, it all belongs to me." The woman's voice broke through the tension. "You didn't build it," she said. "You stole it. You took lives and buried the truth under your lies." The rancher's gaze turned to her, and for the first time, a flicker of anger broke through his calm. "You," he said slowly, "you should have known better than to betray me." "I didn't betray you," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "You betrayed everyone." The men around him shifted uneasily. The rancher's eyes narrowed. "You think anyone will believe you?" he said. "You're nothing without me." The Apache stepped forward. "She doesn't need you to be believed." The rancher tilted his head. "And what about you? You think a savage like you can stand against me and my men?" The Apache's expression didn't change. "I don't stand against you for me. I stand for them," he gestured, toward the scorched earth beneath their feet. "For the ones who never got to speak." The rancher's smile faded. He raised his hand, signaling his men to draw. The woman clutched the box tighter, her breath catching. The Apache turned his head slightly, just enough for her to "Here, when this starts, run to the far ridge. If I don't make it, find the town marshal. Show him what's inside." "I'm not leaving you," she said quickly. "You have to," he replied. "You're the only one who can finish this." Before she could protest, the first shot rang out. The air exploded with chaos, gunfire, smoke, the thunder of horses. The Apache dove behind a fallen beam, returning fire with deadly precision. He moved like a shadow. Each shot counted, each step deliberate. The woman ran toward the ridge, clutching the box, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear the storm behind her. Men shouted. Horses screamed, bullets struck the dirt around her feet. She stumbled but kept moving. Behind her, the Apache fought with the strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. The rancher watched from a distance, calm and unhurried. Like a man certain of his victory, the battle raged until the valley was filled with the smell of smoke and dust. One by one, the riders fell, but more came from the ridge, reinforcements, drawn by the sound of gunfire. The Apache was bleeding from his arm and shoulder, but he stood his ground. He looked toward the woman, who had made it halfway up the hill, and shouted, "Go!" She turned once, her eyes filled with tears. "You'll die if you stay." He gave a faint smile. "Then I'll die where I was born." The rancher rode closer, his revolver drawn. "You can kill all the men you want," he said, "but you'll never change what's already written." The Apache lowered his weapon slightly, his voice calm. "Then I'll write something new." The two men faced each other, the last of the old world and the ghost of the one he destroyed. The rancher fired first. The Apache staggered back, but didn't fall. He fired once in return, and the bullet struck true. The rancher dropped his gun, eyes wide with disbelief, before falling from his horse. The woman screamed his name from the hill, running toward him as the last of the riders fled. The valley grew quiet again, the only sound the soft wind moving through the ashes. She reached him as he fell to his knees, blood staining the earth. "No," she whispered, catching him before he hit the ground. "You can't go now. It's over." He looked up at her, his breathing slow. "It's over for me," he said softly. "Not for you." Tears streaked her face as she shook her head. "You saved me. You saved us all." He smiled faintly, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "No, you saved yourself. You found the truth and carried it farther than I ever could." She held his hand tightly. "You can still live." He looked at her one last time, his voice fading but peaceful. "Then live for both of us." His hand slipped from hers, and for a moment, the valley was still. She closed her eyes, pressing his hand against her heart, the box resting beside them. When she finally stood, the sun had climbed high over the mountains. She walked to where the rancher lay, staring at the man who had once owned everything and now had nothing. The truth had outlived him. She picked up the revolver he had dropped, looked at it, then tossed it into the river below. By the time she reached the town, days later, her clothes were torn, her body weak, but her spirit unbroken. The marshal listened to her story and examined the papers inside the box. What he saw changed everything. The rancher's crimes, the bribes, the false treaties, the burned lands, were laid bare. Word spread quickly, carried from town to town, till even the newspapers spoke of justice in the desert. The woman didn't stay to see the aftermath. She left the papers behind and rode north, following the trail of the river until it vanished into the mountains. Some said she built a small cabin near the old mission, living quietly, tending the wildflowers that grew where ashes once were. Others said she rode on, carrying the Apache's memory with her, never staying long enough for the world to forget what they had both fought for. Years passed, and the valley healed. Grass grew again, and the river carved new paths through the earth. The burned village became a place of quiet, where travelers sometimes stopped and felt a strange calm settle over them, as if the land itself remembered the man who had fought for it. One spring morning, a child found a small beaded charm buried in the dirt near the riverbank, faded, old, but still intact. No one knew where it had come from, but they left it hanging on a branch nearby, letting the wind carry its story. Some nights, when the wind blows across the desert, the people of the nearby town say they can still hear faint voices, the soft cry of a woman and a low murmur of a man answering her in a language the earth has never forgotten. The story of the Apache warrior and the woman who carried the truth became more than a tale. It became a memory of justice, of loss, and of two souls who found peace not through revenge, but through courage. In the end, it was not the gold, the guns, or the power that lasted. It was the truth carried by the wind, whispered through the canyons, and remembered by those who still believe that even in the darkest places, light can return, and somewhere in that endless horizon of sand and sky, the spirit of the Apache still rides with the dawn, guarding the land that was once lost but never forgotten.